Amani hugged him tightly and cried uncontrollably. She could see the anguish in his eyes, the guilt tearing him apart. But she couldn't tell if his regret was genuine or if he'd been playing both sides all along. After the brief kiss they shared in the royal gardens, Amani and Han parted ways for the night, choosing to forget what had happened. Months passed, and the tension in the palace tightened like a noose around Amani's neck. What began as subtle glares grew into open hostility. In secret chambers, in the dead of night, plans were whispered and loyalties bought. The emperor's inner circle grew, while those loyal to the Empress Dowager grew fewer by the day. The climax of this storm arrived during the annual grand banquet. The atmosphere was tense from the start. Amani sensed a strange chill in the air despite the warm summer weather. Han was conspicuously absent, a fact that weighed heavily on her mind. At the main table, not far from the emperor, the Empress Dowager sat, regal and poised as always, her gaze softening only when it fell on Amani. Suddenly, like a knife piercing the night, the attack began. Assassins struck with brutal precision, cutting through the guards and heading straight for the Empress Dowager. Screams filled the hall as courtiers scrambled for safety, and guards tried to fight off the assassins with little success. The emperor stood at the center of the chaos, his face emotionless, watching as his mother's fate unfolded. Amani, frozen in shock, watched helplessly as the Empress Dowager was struck down. Blood stained the floor as she collapsed, mortally wounded. The world around Amani blurred as her vision narrowed in on the woman who had been her protector, her family. She rushed to her side, her heart shattering with every step. Kneeling beside the dying Empress Dowager, Amani was overtaken with grief. Through labored breaths, the Empress Dowager demanded to see the emperor, and though his face remained cold, he knelt by his dying mother's side. She offered him a deal. If Amani's life was spared and she was allowed to leave the palace unharmed, never again to be bothered by the court, the rest of her loyalists would swear allegiance to the emperor. It was a final attempt to protect the girl she loved as her own. The emperor agreed, but his eyes revealed no compassion. With the Empress Dowager gone, Amani was no threat to him. The Dowager called for her most loyal bodyguard, who was injured from the fight, but could still stand. She whispered instructions to him, then told Amani that he would escort her out of the palace. Amani cried, begging her to stop talking and save her strength. The Dowager simply smiled, and with a final breath said to her, "Live freely, my child. You were never meant to be trapped in this palace." Then the Empress Dowager's eyes closed forever, her hand slipping from Amani's grasp. With false sorrow, the emperor ordered the servants to take her body away and prepare for a grand burial. Amani watched in disbelief as the Dowager was carried away. The woman who had saved her, who had given her purpose, was gone. Devastation gripped her heart. But worse, a new suspicion bloomed. Where was Han? Why wasn't he here? Could he have known about this plot to kill the only person who had ever protected her? As the hall emptied and she was left alone with the bodyguard, Han suddenly appeared, rushing toward her, his face pale and frantic. He had tried to stop it, tried to warn her, but he had been too far away, and the plan had been set in motion too quickly. In the end, he was too late. He wanted to explain all this, but looking at Amani, heartbroken and in tears, words failed him. Instead, he simply hugged her. Amani hugged him tightly and cried uncontrollably. She could see the anguish in his eyes, the guilt tearing him apart. But she couldn't tell if his regret was genuine or if he'd been playing both sides all along. Still, it felt like Han was all she had left. In her desperation, she took a bold chance. "I'm leaving the palace," she told him. "Will you come with me?" Her voice was soft, almost pleading, as she struggled to hold on to something real amid the ruins of everything she knew. Han's face reflected his inner turmoil. His heart wanted to follow her, but duty, loyalty, and fear held him back. Finally, he looked away as he said, I can't. I'm sorry, Amani." The words struck Amani like a dagger, and the hope she had clung to shattered in that instant. Suddenly, the weight of the palace, the lies, and the betrayal crushed her with such force that she could barely stand. She pushed Han away, her voice trembling with anguish as she accused him of knowing more than he'd ever let on. Han, desperate to explain, reached for her, but it was too late. Amani motioned to the bodyguard, who had been standing nearby. He carried her, moving swiftly as they fled the palace. She vowed to never return, to leave behind the world of palace politics, deceit, and heartbreak. Han called after her, but his voice faded into the distance as she vanished into the night, leaving behind the life she once knew. The palace was now nothing more than a bitter memory. Amani was free, but her heart was shattered, and she carried with her the weight of loss and the haunting knowledge that the man she loved might have been part of the conspiracy that tore her world apart. The bodyguard led Amani to a hidden sanctuary far from the palace, where a small fortune had been safeguarded by the Empress Dowager in case of an emergency. These funds would become the lifeline for Amani's new life, a final gift from the woman who had loved her like a daughter. Determined to forge a path for herself, Amani set her sights on a nearby city. With the knowledge the Empress Dowager had instilled in her, Amani established a fabric business, and within a short time, she began to stand out in the competitive world of commerce. Rumors about Amani's mysterious past swirled through the city. Whispers of her connection to the palace traveled far and wide, raising eyebrows and fueling speculation. Some tried to undermine her, thinking she was nothing more than a lucky foreigner with questionable ties. But the emperor's deal with the Empress Dowager ensured that no one from the court dared trouble her directly, and Amani's sharp intellect slowly earned her respect among merchants and traders. One day, while passing through the market, Amani came across a scene that stopped her cold. A little girl, no more than 8 or 9 years old, stood on a platform, dirty and tear-streaked, as merchants argued over her price. Her clothes were tattered, and her eyes were filled with a deep sadness that was all too familiar to Amani. She overheard the merchants discussing the girl's fate. Her family had been killed, and she was being sold off to clear their debts. Amani's heart clenched. Without thinking, she stepped forward, purchased the girl's freedom, and led her away from the horrors of the market. The little girl's name was Maylene. At first, she was silent, too traumatized to speak, but as the days passed, Amani cared for her gently, providing food, shelter, and safety. Slowly, Maylene started to trust Amani, clinging to her as a source of warmth in a world that had been so cruel to her. Amani, in turn, saw herself in Milan. She vowed to protect her as the Empress Dowager had once protected her. Soon, Maylene began to blossom under Amani's care. The little girl followed Amani around, eager to learn everything she could. She helped in the business, observing trades and deals with wide-eyed curiosity. Maylene grew to love Amani as a big sister, finding in her the family she thought she had lost forever. She laughed again, and her once hollow eyes now gleamed with hope. Amani taught Maylene everything she knew, finding a new purpose in building her business and raising this girl. Soon, the haunted memories of the palace temporarily faded into the background. 2 years passed, and Amani had worked tirelessly to build her business empire, far removed from the suffocating grip of the palace and the heartache that still haunted her dreams. But Han was never truly gone from her mind. Their time together lingered in her thoughts like a half-forgotten melody. One day, as Amani arrived at her store to oversee the delivery of a new batch of goods, her eyes were drawn to a figure waiting at the entrance. It was Han,